Oh, I was gonna do it too.
Nope.
Oh, London, you're so fine, you blow my mind. Oh, London. Hey, London. Oh, London, you're so fine, you blow my mind. Hey, London. Hey, London. Oh, London, you're so fine, you blow my mind.
Hey, London. Hey, London.
Oh, London, you're so fine, you blow my mind. Hey, London.
In class, our group discussed how Oxford and Harvard students communicated their feelings towards their identities and how they were viewed and received by their respective community. Our group wanted to conduct a similar experiment. We wanted to see how universities in the States compare to those abroad while looking at diversity and inclusion. So throughout this video, you will see photos or hear experiences that exemplify that notion. Please note that while we were in London, we were a little bit more limited in our course of action, but we were able to receive some sound bites and photos from a few institutions that have a similar effect.
Do I leave for California when my love is here behind in Tennessee? From the night times and the mornings, I am aching for the better part of me. With 1,000 miles behind me and 1,000 more that I have yet to go. Well, I kept all of your letters, reading in between the white lines on the road. The white lines on the road. Oh, so won't you come home and dance with me, baby? 'Cause I've been traveling this road that is so dark. So won't you come home and dance with me, baby? 'Cause it's been too long. Oh, it's been too long. Oh, oh yeah. Divided between here and there, and you and them and me. And I know this dream I'm chasing very well could go and be the death of me. So darling, don't you worry, I'll be there before you can close your eyes. I'll be there to kiss my baby, oh, and dance with you into the morning light. Into the morning light. Oh, so
entering this experience, I didn't necessarily know what to expect in comparing the institutions in the States and here in the UK. And so just after hearing folks, speak to us about what they're doing, what they're attempting to do here in the UK, it was kind of very interesting to hear that they're encountering very similar problems to us. And I break it down particularly into three particular sections. That is diversity and inclusivity, access to higher education, and financing higher education. So in the States, we have this kind of drive for access to diverse individuals, but our conceptualization of diversity is focused on race, ethnicity, low SES, first-gen students, whereas here, their conceptualization of diversity is focused on the class and particularly socioeconomic status as a means to include folks. And then lastly, the access or the diversity component. And so creating not only an opportunity for these individuals to enter these institutions, but also how can we ensure that they're actually supported to ensure that they're retained, that they make academic success and ultimately graduate. And so essentially, it doesn't matter if we're providing access if we can't support those students to be able to graduate.
So while we were going through many of these visits, I always kept in mind what I was interested in discovering, which was that interaction between the mission and vision of the institution and how it actually plays out on college campuses. I know that here in London, there were a couple of campuses that we went to, such as Birkbeck within the University of London, as well as London Metropolitan University, that were very, very intentional about stating what their mission was, the fact that they were there to serve either underrepresented students and students with increased needs, or to serve students that are part of the working class population of London that needed access to an evening university so that they would be able to work during the day and study at night. And so it was really cool to know that not only were the staff there so passionate about each of those individual missions, so much so that they were willing to vocally state those things, but that you could see it in the way that their campuses were organized and in a lot of the programming that they had to offer on campus.
So at Oxford, we got a tour of the campus, and because it was just really disjointed, we didn't get a sense of the real campus climate. And so on the way home, I overheard a student of color talking about his experience at Oxford, and so I went up to him and started asking him some questions. And it turned out that Brian was a master's student studying English at Oxford, and he felt really out of place at Oxford. And as we got to keep talking, I found out that of the 38 colleges in Oxford, there's usually less than 4 students of color, and often these students feel like they're shunned in the common spaces with their white student counterparts. Brian also explained to me that in the classroom, he doesn't feel like he's represented in the curriculum or in the faculty, and when bringing these issues up to the administration, they were rejected and told that it wasn't a problem at Oxford. Within the last 3 years, out of pressures from this new Black Student Union, Oxford did decide to start a race summit where the campus committed to creating a more inclusive campus for not only students of color, but sexual orientation, and just they really committed to creating an inclusive campus for all students. The race summit was over a year ago, and Brian said that since then, conditions have actually gotten worse for students of color. For example, the Oxford committed to creating a diversity officer, and within the last year, 2 people have resigned from that position out of blatant racism and resistance by the university to make any actual changes in their campus climate. The students raised that for example, the common spaces in academic buildings were inclusive and welcoming to their identities. Brian brought up the example that the African Studies Library is in the Cecil Rhodes building, and Cecil Rhodes is a famous enslaver of African American people all over the world. The last thing that Brian really brought up to me is that right now they're talking with Oxford staff to really push diversity training after in-class students of color have felt really persecuted by their staff members by not being included in the curriculum, as well as the porters that are the security of every residence hall or college that they call it at Oxford have been racially profiling students and only asking students of color to show their IDs to check that they actually belong there. Just this pretty picture that Oxford paints of being the best place of higher education is a place that is really cutting out a large part of the United Kingdom population and really discouraging students from feeling welcomed there.
I particularly looked at and compared diversity education and educationally purposeful activities between the domestic schools we visited in Daytona compared to the institutions we visited here in London. It seems that the schools in the States, for the most part, have more in-depth and numerous more educationally purposeful activities in regards to teaching diversity and inclusion and in creating that safe space on campuses. We did see at King's College something that really resonated with me. Last year, during their Black History Month, they gathered students to do focus groups, and within those focus groups they asked students to talk about how they are received as students of color within King's. And they recorded it, and then they've shared that to the staff and students, and for the most part it's been very well received. They did point out that one particular professor or staff member, I forget which one it was, however, they did say that, you know, these students, that they're making all this up. And so there's obviously a lot of work to be done. And so for the most part, this audio was received well. And they were kind enough to give us that audio. And so we'll let you listen to that now.
You just don't feel particularly included by the environment. I mean, if you go to a party and no one introduces you, you're just kind of at a party. It's a bit like that at King's. You're just kind of there.
Everything I say, people are like, oh, that's how black people think on this issue. It's really frustrating.
They say black women can be a bit fiery. I've been told I'm fiery, and I thought, well, what's fiery? What do you mean by fiery? I just think you end up having to change your personality to fit in with what the university wants, and that's completely wrong.
I know it sounds strange, but I come out of meetings and sometimes ask myself, why was I talking that way? Why was I adjusting and talking differently?
It's like me in secondary school again, where people were predominantly white. It's like even the little turns of phrases and mannerisms, they're all back.
I can see people who look like me in class, but I can't see people like me represented in terms of the lectures or lecturers.
I'm the only Indian in my course, and I find that very difficult, so I do feel like I act differently, behave differently.
It's just not welcoming when you work alongside someone on a daily basis for years and they continually get your name wrong, even when you correct them, just because you're not called John or Jane.
I always have so much self-hate. Like literally when you just feel like you have to adjust and say stuff so you can fit in.
Last year I had a BME lecturer that was a surgical demonstrator. It just made me feel genuinely happy that someone of colour can be in that position of power, that status. But that was the only time.
When we have discussions about language or identity, I do feel like sometimes when I contribute, lecturers are scared to say something, especially if it's about my culture or my background. I have a friend who's Canadian and always puts her hand up and says like, in Canada, and they will respond like, how about this? But if I say, oh, in Ghana, they'll be like, oh, okay.
The first sentence of the feedback my friend got on her essay was, this is a really good essay for a non-native speaker. I was like, what?
I find I'm reluctant to join the BME staff network because I'm thinking, will I be perceived differently? Will people think I'm joining that group because I've got something to fight for, you know, that I've got an issue? Am I exposing myself because I've got issues?
All the lectures, even if it's about BME issues, is written by white men and it's from their perspective.
When the syllabus doesn't reflect any part of you, or even dehumanises your community, it's not a surprise that we don't want to engage.
There's almost an air of supremacy sometimes. I feel no confidence to express myself or my ideas when coming from a slightly different background than Europe.
Yet you just never want to be wrong. You never want to be too loud. You never want to come across as angry. There are just so many different pressures, and they do affect the ways that I interact with my course. I feel like there are certain limitations to the ways I can get involved.
I hope things can change at King's. I really do. But it's going to mean people deciding to step up and do things differently.